Before we get started, this is your last chance to get our limited edition garlic plushie. The cloves actually pull apart, revealing the amazing molecule that makes garlic garlicky. You only have a few days left to get yours, so make sure to check out the link on screen and in the description. We have made a panoply of videos about cast iron and carbon steel because I am totally obsessed with the science going on in these pans. And apparently, you all are too, since you have collectively spent hundreds of thousands of hours watching these videos. So we decided to put all our cast iron and carbon steel knowledge together in one compilation to make it even easier to get the pantsers you're looking for. Let's go. Use soap. Never use soap. Season with any fat. Definitely don't use those fats. Don't soak, don't scrape. Don't stress about soaking or scraping. It's no wonder so many people are confused about how to care for their cast iron cookware. Luckily, there's a panacea for your pan problems. Really understanding seasoning. No, not that stuff. This kind of seasoning. This is MinuteFood. First, a quick note. We're focusing on cast iron, but pretty much everything in this video also applies to carbon steel. Because they're mostly just iron, these metals are super reactive. On its own, a bare cast iron or carbon steel pan will chemically bond with almost anything you cook in it. It'll rust when it comes into contact with water. But that reactivity can also help you change the properties of the pan's surface. If you put a whisper-thin layer of fat in the pan and get it really hot, like burn it, you'll create a bunch of reactive molecules that will interact with carbon-carbon double bonds in the fat, triggering a chain reaction that bonds the fat molecules together and the pan, creating a solid material called a polymer. This thin layer, or really many of these thin layers bonded to each other and interspersed with carbonized stuff from the oil, is what's known as seasoning. Since that seasoning, like the fat it came from, is made of molecules that aren't keen to interact with water or watery stuff, a well-seasoned pan is stick-resistant. Note I said stick-resistant. Even the best seasoned cast iron pan will never truly be non-stick. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of how to season a pan. There are great instructions out there already. But a good understanding of the science of seasoning can help with some of the sticky spots involved in getting your pan properly seasoned, and keeping it that way. First, you need to use a fat with plenty of carbon-carbon double bonds, since that's where polymerization happens. And while at least some of these bonds are present in every cooking fat, the more unsaturated a fat is, the more of these reactive bonds it has. So olive oil polymerizes a bit better than lard, and canola oil polymerizes a bit better than olive oil. But a fat with too many of these bonds may polymerize so efficiently that the seasoning you get is brittle and flakes off. So despite what you read online, super unsaturated oils like flaxseed may not be very good for seasoning. But pretty much any other cooking fat, if used judiciously and built up over time, will create a seasoning layer that's just fine for home cooking. Judiciousness is important because the thicker each layer of oil is, the harder it is for that oil to polymerize. Sticky brown spots mean that the oil hasn't polymerized or carbonized properly. You'll need thinner layers, higher heat, more time, or all three. So take your time seasoning and let those thin layers build up. Once you perfect that seasoning, though, it's going to be super tough because it's a polymer, the same kind of structure plastics are made of. And what makes plastics so hard to destroy? The carbon-carbon bonds that hold these polymers together are really strong. What's more, the specific kind of polymer created by oil in a reactive pan is particularly tough because its molecules are cross-linked. They're bonded together in a tight network. This is the same polymer structure that super resilient plastics like tires are made of. This resilience means that cast iron can take a lot of abuse. Feel free to really go at a well-seasoned pan. Basic brushing and scraping aren't really going to hurt that tough polymer. And if some overzealous scouring does do a little damage, that's okay. As you continue to cook with your pan, you'll keep laying down new layers of seasoning, patching things right up. Also, while you won't usually need soap, don't be afraid to use it. Just like a little soap won't destroy a plastic bucket, it won't take the seasoning off your pan. The no soap commandment probably came about back when soap was full of lye, a really high pH substance that is super corrosive. But the way lower pH dish soap in your kitchen isn't going to hurt your seasoning. The one thing you shouldn't do is soak a cast iron pan, or even leave it wet after you wash it. Because of the way oil polymerizes, there are tiny holes in any single seasoning layer. And given enough time, water can creep through these holes, reach the bare iron, and cause rusting. The better seasoned your pan is, the less likely this is to happen. Even so, it's not worth the risk. Given you can scrub and use soap, you shouldn't need to soak cast iron in the first place. In the end, cast iron, and carbon steel for that matter, is really forgiving. Yeah, there's some guidelines to follow, but you really just need to use the thing. Because every time you cook something, you're either adding to or replacing the seasoning you have on there. And if you encounter serious pan problems, don't panic. Just start seasoning again from scratch. In this age of disposable stuff, a good cast iron pan is a truly renewable resource. Over a lot of years, my kitchen has accumulated a lot of pans, especially skillets. But there's one that I reach for way more than any other. This is MinuteFood. In my kitchen, the real workhorse is carbon steel. Carbon steel pans have been popular in restaurant kitchens for a while, but they've only recently started to get popular among home cooks, which in my mind is a total travesty, an outrageous oversight. I think they're the most versatile, pleasant-to-use pans out there. And diving into the science of why that's the case actually helps explain the pros and cons of a bunch of different cookware. A quick note, this video isn't sponsored by some pan company. I'm not trying to sell you anything here. But psst, if you run an awesome cookware company, let's talk. I just want to share the nerdy stuff I've learned about my own panoply of pans. Now that that's out of the way, let's look at a few of the most popular types of pans out there. First, non-stick. These pans' biggest selling point is that they're coated with a thin layer of non-stick material that makes them super slippery. It's virtually impossible to get food to stick to this thing. Unfortunately, that non-stick coating is not at all durable, and evidence is mounting that it's terrible for the environment and for us. Then there's stainless steel. Stainless steel pans are, unsurprisingly, mostly stainless steel with at least one added layer of another metal, like aluminum or copper. The work and materials that go into manufacturing these pans makes them pretty expensive. But their big advantage is that they conduct heat really well. In other words, heat moves through the pan easily. So stainless steel pans heat up fast when you add heat and cool down fast when you take heat away. Perfect for something like sautéing, where you want to be able to control the temperature pretty carefully. Then there's cast iron, which is kind of the opposite of stainless steel. It's made of mostly iron with a bit of carbon thrown in, a combination which is not particularly good at conducting heat. So it takes cast iron a while to heat up and cool down. Plus, cast iron is a remarkably brittle metal, so pans made from it have to be really thick. And all that thickness means that heat takes even longer to move all the way through them. But here's the big upside of a relatively unresponsive pan. It's really good at holding on to heat. So once it's hot, cast iron is a beast at jobs like putting a really good sear on something. Okay, so we have cast iron, the heat-retaining beasts, over here, and super responsive stainless steel over here. And now, finally, we get to carbon steel, which lands right about here. See, like cast iron, carbon steel is made up of mostly iron and a little carbon, so it too is naturally more of a heat retainer than a heat conductor. But because of its slightly different composition, a bit less carbon and more iron, which, yes, is totally confusing given their names, carbon steel is much less brittle than cast iron. So carbon steel pans can be made thin enough that even though they aren't inherently great at conducting heat, they're actually remarkably responsive. One quick caveat, carbon steel that's too thin isn't ideal. Really thin pans made of materials that don't conduct heat particularly well can sometimes heat unevenly. For me, a good quality carbon steel pan hits an awesome sweet spot between the uber responsiveness of stainless steel and the uber heat retention of cast iron. Plus, they're way lighter than cast iron and way cheaper than stainless steel, which are big bonus points in my mind, given that neither my arms nor my bank account are capable of a lot of heavy lifting. But wait, there's more. When they're properly seasoned and cared for, they can also get pretty darn close to the non-stickness of a non-stick pan. Yes, you can also get a nice stick-resistant surface on cast iron, but since carbon steel is so much less brittle than cast iron, it can be stamped out of smooth metal sheets rather than cast in sand molds. So the surface of a carbon steel pan is generally slicker and, therefore, non-sticker. I'm not saying you should toss out all your other cookware. Stainless steel is a little more responsive. Cast iron retains heat a bit better, and non-stick is slightly non-sticker. They all, okay, with a possible exception of non-stick, have a place in a well-stocked kitchen. But more often than not, I'm cooking with this one. It's truly pan-tastic. If you cook a lot, you probably also spend a lot of time cleaning up afterwards, both to make things not gross and to make them safe to cook with or eat off next time. But then there's cast iron and carbon steel, pans which, in order for them to work properly, you actually want to be careful not to clean too well. Isn't that gross? Or worse, actually dangerous? And what does that mean for how you should actually clean these things? This is MinuteFood. This is a question, well, a comment really, that we get all the time. And while I am a huge fan of both cast iron and carbon steel, I can see where these misgivings about seasoned pans are coming from. I mean, that word alone, seasoned, is one of the big issues here. It kind of implies that it's supposed to help give flavor to what you cook in these pans. And yeah, the idea of potentially decades-old fat flavoring your food is downright disgusting. But that's not what should be going on here. Cooking in a seasoned pan does not mean cooking in a dirty, greasy pan. See, in a properly seasoned pan, the fat is no longer fat. Thanks to super high heat, it has undergone a chain reaction that bonds the fat molecules together and to the pan. You can find more details about what actually happens in this previous video we made about seasoning. But what's important here is that this process transforms the fat molecules into something totally different. A solid material called a polymer that's bonded to the pan itself and acts as a protective, nearly non-stick coating. Back in the day, people built up this coating by simply cooking in the pan again and again and again over a long period of time. This, the long time scale over which these layers were laid down, is what gives seasoning its name. As Garcia talks about in this great video, a pan is called seasoned for the same reason you might call a person seasoned or some firewood seasoned, because it's been around for, well, seasons, not because it's supposed to flavor your food. I will argue that cooking with a well-seasoned pan can contribute to tastier food because the types of pans you generally season excel in things like getting a great sear, so they can help you create all sorts of delicious flavor compounds via the Maillard reaction. But if you're tasting fish from last night's dinner or crunching on crumbs from the last meal you cooked in your seasoned pan, you aren't cleaning it well enough. So let's chat about how you should clean a seasoned pan. You do want to remove all the actual cooking residue. Any crumbs, cooked on gunk, pools of fat or oil. Some people swear by coarse salt, chainmail thingamajigs, and nylon or bamboo brushes. But in our house, we are big fans of these little plastic scrapers and these awesome yucca scrubbies that a friend of mine makes. If you need to, you can scrape a bit more aggressively with something a bit more serious. Or briefly boil a little water to loosen up the gunk. What you don't want to do when you clean a cast iron or carbon steel pan is remove the seasoning layers you've worked so hard to build up by, say, scrubbing too aggressively, boiling too long, or putting it in the dishwasher. This subtlety, that you want to clean the pan but not clean off the polymerized seasoning, is where a lot of the misconceptions about not actually cleaning these pans come from. As long as your pan is properly seasoned, a basic cleaning is not going to hurt the layers upon layers of tough polymer. And that includes soap, despite what some people say. Back in your grandma's time, soap used to contain lye, a super high pH compound, which is capable of taking the seasoning off a pan. But modern dish soaps don't generally contain lye. So although you shouldn't usually need soap, a little isn't going to hurt. Once your pan is gunk-free, the best practice is to reapply a teeny touch of oil and briefly heat it back up. This removes any leftover moisture, therefore preventing rust, and adds an extra seasoning layer to keep your pan in tip-top condition. I will admit, and all you seasoning pedants may want to cover your ears for a few seconds here, in our house, we will often skip this entirely, or at least skip the additional heating step. But we live in a super dry place, so we don't have to worry about evaporating away excess moisture. And our everyday pans are in such heavy rotation that they're basically constantly being seasoned. The bottom line is that after cleaning a cast iron or carbon steel pan, there shouldn't be any old food or greasy residue left, just the pan's polymerized seasoning itself, and maybe a very thin layer of oil. But say, for whatever reason, your cleaning falls short and you leave a bit of crusty food behind. Or worst case scenario, you ignore our advice about cleaning entirely and don't even give your pan a scrape before calling it a day. Forget the issue of flavor. Won't dangerous stuff grow in there? The science on this is very clear. Nope. First of all, microbes require moisture to thrive. Any crustified food left in your pan will have been so incinerated that any water that was once inside it will be long gone, leaving it uninhabitable for any nasty stuff. What's more, as soon as you preheat that pan for the next use, the high temps will kill any nasties that maybe somehow could have grown. In this way, a pan is really different from using a cutting board you never sanitized or a never fully washed plate. Those things aren't subjected to high heat in the same way a pan is. So to the copious commenters out there, a seasoned pan shouldn't be a dirty pan. But even if it is, it isn't a dangerous pan. So let's stop panning these pans, okay? It's the starting point of so many recipes, but it seems so easy that I never thought that much about how to actually do it. But properly preheating a pan can be critical to nailing a dish. And it turns out I've been doing a pretty bad job. This is MinuteFood. First, a disclaimer. You know I love disclaimers. I'm explicitly not mentioning coated non-stick pans like Teflon in this video. Not only because I'd like to discourage their use, but also because it's really easy to heat Teflon to the point that it releases dangerous chemicals. So here, I'm talking about other pans you're likely to use on your stovetop. Sometimes you do want to start out with a cool pan, and there's some cool science behind when and why that makes sense. Maybe we'll do a video on that someday. But more often than not, when you're working on the stovetop, you get better results when you start food in a hot pan. And there are two main reasons for that. First, a hot pan helps keep food from sticking by very quickly modifying the structure of molecules in a food in a way that makes them less likely to bond with the metal in a pan. Second, a hot pan develops deliciousness by really quickly evaporating water off a food's surface, kickstarting the Maillard reaction. But in order to use preheating to your advantage, you have to know how quickly a pan heats up and how hot it's getting. And I recently realized that I don't have a great sense of this. So I fell down a rabbit hole and started experimenting. And experimenting. And the first thing I found is that I haven't been preheating anywhere near long enough. Like, here's my go-to carbon steel pan on the medium setting on my gas stove. 2 minutes in, which is probably around the time I'd normally get antsy and start cooking most stuff, the pan was only 200 degrees Fahrenheit, nowhere near hot enough to get big benefits from preheating. It took nearly 4 minutes for the pan to reach 375 degrees. That, of course, doesn't mean that 4 minutes is the right length of time to preheat a pan. First, because you don't necessarily want your pan at 375. Depending on what you're cooking, you might want something a little gentler or something hotter. But also because different pans take different amounts of time to reach the same temperature. All sorts of things can affect the speed at which heat moves through a pan, like how well the material it's made of conducts heat. Heat will travel more slowly through a stainless steel pan than an aluminum pan, and slower still through cast iron and carbon steel. Size matters too. The larger or thicker a pan, the longer it takes heat to move through all that metal. Here's how long it took various pans in my kitchen to preheat to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. But how long it takes to heat up a pan also depends on your setup. So these numbers won't be your numbers. You need to do your own legwork to get a sense of how long it takes to heat your particular pans in your particular kitchen. And then there's the question of how to know when a pan actually reaches whatever temperature you want to cook at. I used to be on team take a wild guess, but there are a lot of much better alternatives. One is obviously a thermometer, which is what I've been using so far in this video. But there's a problem with some thermometers, specifically infrared thermometers. These thermometers don't actually measure surface temperature. They measure how much infrared energy is radiating out of that surface. And sometimes that is a good proxy for surface temperature. Carbon steel and cast iron emit energy really effectively, which you probably know if you've ever held your hand over a screaming hot cast iron pan. The heat you're feeling is basically what an infrared thermometer measures. And in the case of cast iron, it's a pretty reliable indicator for how hot the surface of the pan actually is. Shiny metals, on the other hand, are not good at emitting energy. Their shiny surfaces are better at reflecting the energy of their surroundings. That's why when you hold your hand over a screaming hot stainless steel pan, it won't feel all that hot. And why an infrared thermometer will give a temperature reading that's lower than the pan's actual surface temperature.
In nerdy parlance, this feature is called emissivity, and there are some ways you can account for it with an infrared thermometer, which I did for this video, but it's kind of a pain to do it for everyday use. Surface thermometers, which measure the actual temperature of a surface, are more reliable. But as I've played around with these, I found that they take so long to respond to changes in temperature that they're basically useless for preheating. Don't despair though. There are other ways to tell how hot your pan is, and they're way more creative and interesting. One is by dropping a little bit of water in a hot pan. If it just sits there, your pan is less than 212 degrees Fahrenheit. It's below the boiling point of water. If it sizzles and evaporates away, it's somewhere between 212 degrees and 375-ish. But if it bounces into beautiful little dancing balls, it's reached what's called the latent frost point, the temperature at which the pan is hot enough to immediately vaporize the water at the bottom of the drop. That layer of vapor insulates the rest of the drop from the pan's heat, allowing it to skate along for a long time without evaporating. The exact temperature of water's latent frost point is complicated, but as I've messed around, I tend to see this effect start at around 350 degrees and get really good above 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So based on how a drop of water behaves, you can tell the approximate temperature of your pan. And you can do something similar with a glug of oil. Above about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, the oil will loosen up and get what some people call legs. At around 350 degrees, you'll start to see it shimmer. And somewhere above that, the exact temperature depends on the kind of oil you're using, you'll see the oil start to smoke. Butter can give you some temperature clues too. Preheat butter in a cold pan until it foams. At this point, the water inside the butter is boiling, so you know the pan has reached 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Once the butter starts smoking, you've exceeded its smoke point of 350 degrees. These eyeballing strategies aren't perfect. They give you a ballpark temperature range, but they are reliable enough for the preheating purposes of most home cooks. Just wait until you're in the right range for whatever you're cooking and dive on in. As an added bonus, these visual clues don't require any special equipment or any in-depth knowledge of materials science. Eventually, you might get good enough that you don't need any of these cues to have a good sense of your pan's temperature. And maybe you're already there. I have now preheated 44 pans specifically for this video, and I feel like I'm finally getting a feel for how it all works. But I'm gonna keep on using those dancing balls because they're just really freaking cool. And also really hot.
Every time we make a video about cast iron or carbon steel pans, we get a panoply of questions about one particular thing about these pans. Whether their seasoning comes with safety concerns. And despite scouring the cast iron conversations and commentary out there, I haven't found a single good evidence-based answer to this question. And now, after digging into the science, I understand why. This is MinuteFood. First, the context. When you put a super thin layer of oil in a cast iron or carbon steel pan and heat it up, you'll create reactive molecules that interact with the bonds in the oil's fatty acids, triggering a chain reaction that bonds these fatty acids together and to the iron in the pan, creating a layer of big solid molecules called polymers. This thin solid layer, or really many of these thin solid layers, makes up the pan's seasoning, the slick, stick-resistant surface that makes a cast iron or carbon steel pan a joy to use. But what these comments are concerned with is whether there are health risks that come along with seasoning. There's really two different questions here. The first has to do with the seasoning layer itself. Is this slickified surface safe to cook on, and maybe even ingest little bits of? Some of these comments cite that the polymer is plastic and therefore must be harmful to cook on. And while polymerized fatty acids do share some structural similarities with what most of us think of as plastic, these polymers are inert, non-toxic, and super heat safe. Most of the comments here focus on a different concern. When you heat up oil, chemical reactions, ones separate from polymerization, can produce compounds that, when ingested in large enough quantities or with enough regularity, can be associated with health problems like cardiovascular disease and cancer. So should people be concerned about cooking on a surface that's literally made by heating up oil? And I'm going to tell you right off the bat that there are no scientific studies that evaluate this particular question. I cannot point you to peer-reviewed research that definitively shows that cooking with seasoned pans is safe. But here's the thing. People who actually study the kinds of scientific processes that underlie seasoning don't have any reason to believe that it's harmful. In fact, one expert I contacted for this video pretty clearly thought that I was fear-mongering by even addressing this question in the first place. But I believe that people asking about the safety of seasoned pans are generally doing it in good faith, so I think it's important to make sure there's a good science-based answer out there. And every scientist that was willing to talk to me had pretty much the same take on the science. During the polymerization process, as the oil heats up, it is possible that some of those potentially harmful compounds are being produced. Anytime you heat up oil, you're probably creating some of those compounds. But most of us aren't worried about a little sautéing. And when you season a pan, you're using, or you should be using, way less oil than that. The general recommendation is to use what's left behind after you wipe out the oil with a paper towel. So even if harmful compounds are being produced when you season a pan, we're talking really small numbers. Plus, since the oil layer is so thin and these compounds tend to be pretty volatile, any that do form are likely to evaporate away. If there are any left behind, as the fatty acids in the oil link up into that solid polymer layer, they'd basically become immobilized. It would be really unlikely for them to leach into any food you're cooking. And yeah, sometimes tiny flakes of the seasoning layer do flake off. If you were to ingest those pieces, remember, the amount of potentially harmful compounds in there would almost certainly be tiny, nowhere near the thresholds known to cause health problems. At least this is what the really smart people who study these particular processes think. Remember, nobody has done a study to actually prove that cooking on seasoned pans is safe. I would love this research to exist, but scientists don't generally evaluate long-held human practices like cast iron seasoning unless there's some mechanistic reason to believe they might be risky, or evidence of a disease cluster, like the health issues common in people that are around a lot of talc or talcum powder, which did spur further research. But when it comes to cooking in seasoned pans, there is simply no plausible mechanism and no evidence of disease clusters, which means there's no scientific reason for you to be concerned. We aren't done here though. We have a second health-related question about seasoning to look into. This one has to do with the process of seasoning a pan, because bringing an oiled pan up to high temps to season it can create smoke and other fumes. And we do know from a big body of established research that being around a lot of smoke is a risk factor for a bunch of diseases. So yes, it is almost certainly true that regularly creating and inhaling a lot of smoke during the seasoning process could trigger health problems. What is also true, though, is that the amount of smoke created when you properly season a pan is, in the grand scheme of things, almost certainly negligible. Because anytime you cook in any pan, you're creating smoke and other types of emissions that are known to contribute to indoor air pollution. Research has found that especially as homes become more airtight, cooking can cause certain measures of indoor air quality to exceed health standards. So we should probably all be a bit more concerned about how what we do in the kitchen affects the air we breathe. But with that said, the seasoning process, when done correctly, shouldn't account for a ton of smoke or other fumes. If your pans are in regular use, you don't have to season them each time. When you do season, remember you're only using a tiny bit of oil. And contrary to a lot of advice out there, you don't have to bring oil up to its smoke point to season a pan. Most oils you'd use for seasoning begin to polymerize well below their smoke points. And anytime you heat up a pan, whether it has food in it or not, you should be using good ventilation. So it's reasonable to assume that, especially compared to everyday cooking, basic responsible seasoning practices shouldn't be a major air quality concern. The bottom line is that while we can't point to data that definitively says for once and for all that the seasoning layer and the seasoning process are completely safe, that's because scientists and doctors and governing bodies don't have any reason to suspect that there's real risk here. In contrast, we have tons of actual scientific evidence that a popular alternative to these pans, non-stick pans coated with forever chemicals, can have significant health and environmental consequences. If you want more info, we made a video all about this. So if you are truly concerned about health risks, know that seasoned pans are almost certainly the safer choice for you and the planet. And I, for one, am pretty happy that we could finally iron out these issues. Okay, so you finally decided on what to make for dinner, but now you're faced with another decision. What pan to cook it in? Or maybe the recipe tells you what pan to use, but you don't have it. What do you sub in?
we have put together a super simple guide to help you figure out which pan is the panacea for the very thing you are cooking. This is MinuteFood. In the grand scheme of things, which pan you use to cook a meal isn't that critical a decision. It's not like you're deciding whether to save a life or what to name your baby. So if you don't have a range of pans to pick from, or if you're particularly fond of one, just use it. Your dinner will almost certainly be fine. But different types of cookware do have different strengths and weaknesses. That's why it pays to have at least a few different options if possible, and why it's worth at least considering which one is best suited to whatever it is you're making. Here, we're going to consider 4 common types of cookware: stainless steel, carbon steel, cast iron, and enameled cast iron. Yes, I am purposefully excluding non-stick. Teflon and other PFAS-containing products are a no-go for me. And although there are good non-stick alternatives available, for most purposes, I just think there are better options out there. So you've got a meal picked out, right? We're going to boil this down to 3 main criteria, basically questions to ask yourself about it. And in case you're wondering, yes, I am a big sporkful fan, and I did channel Dan Pashman's fantastic pasta criteria here. Okay, so first, searability. How important is it to get a great sear on whatever it is that you're making? Searing is all about a pan's ability to hold on to a lot of heat, even when it's slapped with a big piece of cold food. And iron, which both carbon steel and cast iron pans are predominantly made of, is really good at heat retention. Cast iron pans, whether they're enameled or not, are particularly great because they are so massive. All that iron can store so much heat, creating this picture of complete perfection. Stainless steel's metal makeup makes it a good searer, but not a searing superstar. So if a nice brown crust is critical, standard or enameled cast iron are your best bets. Carbon steel is close behind, and stainless steel would be my last pick. Okay, so on to criteria number 2, stickability. How important is it that your food doesn't stick? Or that it does stick? Which sounds like a weird question, but stick with me, because sometimes a bit of sticking is desirable. Food sticks to a pan because when certain molecules are exposed to heat, they change shape, literally opening up opportunities to form bonds with the surface of the pan. Protein and sugar-packed foods are particularly likely to undergo these changes, and therefore to stick. The pan matters too, because what it's made of determines the likelihood of forming those bonds. Standard cast iron and carbon steel, assuming you've seasoned and cared for them properly, are pretty stick resistant because their seasoning layers are made up of polymerized oil, which isn't keen to bond with food molecules. Stainless steel and enameled cast iron, on the other hand, tend to be more likely to stick. That's because their surfaces, steel in the case of stainless steel, and in the case of enameled cast iron, basically powdered glass fused to the surface, are much more susceptible to forming bonds with food molecules, which isn't actually always a bad thing. Bits of food that stick to the surface of the pan can be an absolutely magical ingredient, which you may have heard called fond. It is the basis for a really good pan sauce. So if you're not worried about your food sticking, or if you want to set up a really nice sauce, enameled cast iron and stainless steel are great choices. If you're dealing with delicate stuff, like eggs or fish or dumplings, and want to minimize the chances of sticking, standard cast iron and carbon steel are the better choice by far. Okay, time for our final criteria: unreactability. Yeah, there's probably a cleverer name for this one. Feel free to give me your ideas in the comments, but this is my video and I'm going with unreactability. How important is it that your pan is basically inert? This comes into play if you're going to be simmering something soupy or acidic, or God forbid, something acidic and soupy. Let's talk acid first. Acid is corrosive enough that it can break down the polymerized oil that forms the seasoning on your cast iron or carbon steel pan. What's more, acid can interact with the iron that makes up these pans. As a result, a little bit of iron can leach into whatever you're cooking and make it taste metallic. Water, too, can creep into tiny holes in the seasoning layers of even a properly seasoned cast iron or carbon steel pan, reach the bare iron underneath, and cause rust. I am not saying that a little water or a splash of citrus are going to cause problems for your cast iron or carbon steel pans. These two issues are more of, well, an issue the longer you're cooking something. We're talking a scale of hours, not minutes, and the less well-seasoned your pan is. But if you're simmering something wet or packed with acid, like citrus, tomatoes, wine, or vinegar, carbon steel and cast iron may not be the best choice. Neither stainless steel nor the glazed coating on enameled cast iron tend to react when it comes to water or acid. So when it comes to long-simmered or acidic meals, these pans do just fine. You may notice that this outcome is the same split as our previous criteria, stickability, which, when you think about it, makes perfect sense. The way seasoned pans work, their iron reacts with superheated oil, creating a nice stick-resistant seasoning, is also what puts these pans at risk when it comes to chemical reactions involving water and acid. So at least in terms of the cookware we're talking about here, pans that are low in stickability are also low in unreactability, and vice versa. So those are the criteria. Simple, right? If you're panicking about your pan choice, just run through these questions and they can help guide you to a great cookware choice. And if you want a visual guide to this process, head over to our Patreon page where we have just that, because we depend on your support. Got another question about cast iron or carbon steel? Let us know in the comments, because we are always looking for an excuse to add another video to our panthology.